the book is pretty much always better than the movie. Well, I think so. Do you? Why would that be, and what can we deduce from it? I have an idea why, and think it leads to some pretty crazy, awesome side effects. Hello and welcome. Let's take a little ride through this subject I think is pretty interesting. Now, I used to play a game on the Palm Pilot. I think it was called Ragnarok. It was a classic dungeon crawler thing. Now, this was way back in the day, so the interface was all just ASCII characters. You were literally an @ symbol. Now, the Hellhounds, they breathed fire, were the letter H, dragons were a capital D, stuff like that. So you could qualify the UI as somewhat primitive. Still, after playing for a little while, I have to tell you, when that big D popped up onto the scene, your heart started pounding. Yes, that is what she said. Playing the game, you managed to feel enthralled, completely submerged in the adventure, exploring, opening traps, avoiding monsters, killing skeletons, whatever. You were in the game. Now, this ability for symbolic cognition, mapping one thing to another by using that first thing as a representation for the latter, is something humans really shine at and seems to start around the age of 2. I remember popping out of the game world once because part of me had noticed just how strongly, like physically, I'd reacted to some letter appearing on a little black and green screen. This got me thinking how, even though it was literally just a set of characters I was seeing there was an actual adventure happening in my mind. I'm not saying it was a fully immersive 3D experience now with smell-o-vision TM, but I was taking in input from the world through my eyes, these random little squiggles, these lines on a display, and creating a universe, or enough of one, to activate subsystems like fight or flight. I mean, that was the whole point, and is what made it fun. This is what happens, to an even greater extent perhaps, with books. I think there's more to it, like I didn't read Dune for the longest time because I'd seen the movie, the old Lynch from '84 with Sting strutting his stuff. It was pretty good, it was entertaining and visually appealing, but the truth is I mostly had no idea what the fuck was going on beyond the obvious. Now, 3/4 of Dune, the story, is exposition, context, or happening inside of people's heads. Now, that's a tad tricky to render on a screen, and it's only when I was finally convinced to read the thing that I realized just how much I'd missed and how good it really was. So that, and the fact that the author has room to cover a lot, and that you can ingest it at your own pace, all these things probably play a part in making the book more gooder. But I think that the most important aspect is that when you're reading, you're basically ingesting the parameters that allow you to reconstruct or to create a universe. Now, some books go extra heavy on descriptions and stuff. You'll spend 3 paragraphs talking about the curtains. I get bored pretty fast in those cases because I'm pretty plot driven. But at the same time, even in those wordy kinds of books, you just never have a description of every single thing. Even if the author does take the time to describe the precise shape of her pretty little button nose, it's partial and you only go over that once. You're free to forget about it because it's not in your face the whole time. So most everything that is happening is actually being filled in by your preconceptions, by wishes, by expectations, that is, by you. In this regard, the adventure you're living there is a collaboration between you and the author. The author fills in those details they want to give you to advance the story or set the mood, and you fill in all the rest. And there's nothing people like more than themselves and a world that meets their expectations. Now, like with the game, that doesn't mean that you're recreating an entire universe from quark to galaxy, or even the whole room. I think it's a little bit like a dream. Ever watch videos of pickpockets or magicians explaining their craft? If not, do it. It's super cool. But the point is that these guys are masters of directing or misdirecting your attention, so they can do the dirty work where you're not looking. Now, we like to think pickpockets weaponize blind spots, and I mean they do. They direct attention, exploiting sensory thresholds and leveraging psychology and stuff. But you can't call it a blind spot if it's the rule rather than the exception. Now, we filter out almost everything, there's just too much, and actually see almost nothing, living our lives through the lens of a super tiny, super focused area of attention. Realize that we have maybe 200 degrees of field of view, but the fovea in your eye that gives you colorful perception that's actually sharp only covers about 2 degrees. 2. Outside of that, acuity nosedives quickly into blurry motion detection and little else. So your impression of seeing what's around you, it's just all made up. So that's also my theory about dream worlds. There's no generated universe your consciousness is walking around in. Your mind just fills in the blanks. The dream generator's concentrated on creating that little bit you're focused on, and it just lets the observer part of you assume the rest, that the rest is as you'd expect, just like you do all day, every day, your entire waking life. And that's also my theory about what's happening when reading. Everything that isn't stated explicitly, and even some bits that were, you just invent as you'd prefer it to be, as you would assume it to be, as you have decided it would be. And this is all a background process that you don't even notice. The point is that bits of the story can be well told and interesting and titillating, which is great, but every other bit you might care to consider is left up to you, and so is custom made for you by you. Feels to me like we do this all the time, and it's why I don't think I'd actually have much success in online dating. First off, there's the fact that my personal book cover here, by which I'm definitely judged, probably isn't a great representation of what's inside. Maybe I'm clickbait? More importantly to me is that 90% of the stuff animal me is expecting when interacting with another human, body language, smells and pheromones, tones of voice, tics, mannerisms, all the million little signals we evolved to detect and interpret, well, they're just MIA. And I have a sneaking suspicion that, without even realizing it, some part of the brain would be trying to infer them from way too little data, or just outright inventing them according to my hopes, or at least expectations. And that there is a recipe for disappointment. The longer you putz around online, the more your brain will have time to wonder about and then generate the missing bits according to taste, and that's not going to work out great. I think that actually implies that if you're a player with no concerns about anything more than a single meat, your best bet is to provide the least amount of information possible on those apps. Now, that's probably a testable hypothesis. I just don't care enough. Anyway, the point is that reading is a mix of being surprised by the author, just enough to be entertained without getting lost. So a mix of author content and making stuff up yourself, just the way you'd like it to be. Now, there are two things with this. First is that the movie can never do that. If you had imagined the hero looking like so, being this kind of person, moving this way, as you fill in all the blanks with your preferences, well, the movie's not going to be able to deliver that. The film has to make some choices. This is the actor, and this is her face. Out of the immense possibility space, it's pretty unlikely to be a match to the perfect by definition selection of your own mind. All parties involved in making the movie, casting, set design, etc., are making choices that would have otherwise been left up to you, and therefore perfectly customized to you. So that's why the book is always better than the movie, because everybody who reads a book is having a somewhat different experience that is 100% customized to their biases and preferences. Now, the real point of all this is that your involvement in co-creating this universe, this adventure tale, this sequence, makes it really easy to accept and more likely to be let in without any resistance, and generally a more pleasurable experience. Great, reading is so fun, yay. But if this is true, there are two hidden bonuses in here. While you're reading, you are working, as in actively engaged in creating the scenes and sequence of events. Paying attention, vividly imagining, and even feeling emotional involvement will all make the journey more interesting, but they'll also impact how deeply and precisely you remember those events. And memories sure are an interesting thing. Memories are actually stored, i.e. encoded, in your brain somewhere, somehow, right? Just how isn't all that clear, but I lean towards the idea that they're stored holographically in the sense of distributed, something that was hinted at long ago, though by experiments on rats, because you can't take out chunks of people's brains and see if they forgot how to play Aqualung. Anyhow, the holographic encoding makes sense to me in that it's better if damage, say from a mini-stroke, causes a loss of resolution rather than a literal piece of memory just going away. Yeah. I don't know. That line of reasoning may be BS, since I don't think that people are getting TIAs before reproductive age, and only those things that happen before you pass on the germline have a heavy impact on fitness. Maybe some protoform of life was more susceptible to brain damage, whatever. Because how would you do it otherwise? It's not like we can write an MP4 file a byte at a time to some sort of block RAM. I don't think that's how neural nets behave. I don't know. A topic for another day. Something we can be pretty certain of is that with episodic memories, the engrams are not a series of frames with 4K pixels at 30 FPS. It's more like some sort of outline with highlights and salient bits covering all the things you found most important and paid most attention to. That would mean that memories are more a process of interpretation and reconstitution than they are in any way photographic, and this is a part of what makes them super plastic. When retrieved, the network containing the memory is reactivated somehow, and the memory is in a state of reconsolidation, where it's kind of fragile and subject to modification before it's rewritten back to storage, and it is. We think this is the case because interference can be used in things like extinction training in therapy, where they progressively blunt the hit of traumatic memories with PTSD patients by surfacing the memory, working on it before it goes back to storage. Then there's drugs like, I think it's propranolol, something like that, that can weaken memories or at least their emotional impact, and surely other stuff I don't know about. Now, the converse of that is false memory injection. For this, look up Elizabeth Loftus. The neat thing with experiments like the Lost in the Mall study is that not only did simple interviews that blended facts with suggestive BS manage to get 25% of people to spontaneously generate a false memory about themselves, some people over time actually went ahead and added really specific, vivid bits to the false memory, like how the mall smelled. Now, combined with stuff like the work of Schachter on suggestibility, you start realizing just how fragile and really mostly made up our memories are. So with all this, how is it that you can tell the difference between something that really happened to you and something you just imagined? Short version is, I don't know. The longer version is that our brains use some sort of source monitoring to track where memories come from, and there's a feel and depth to the contextual details of real memory versus the polished experience from a story. And we surely use logic to track whether something fits in our timeline. Do you remember that time we were living as pure consciousness uploads to the Dyson sphere around Proxima Centauri? Yeah, that one's probably not mine. But the truth is that it can get all fuzzy, and the false memory stuff shows that the blurriness can actually become sharp, even if it's never actually happened. Okay, you say, that's weird. So reading a story might be more pleasing, but it has a greater chance of looking like a false memory. How is that a good thing? I once saw something about downhill skiers training for the Olympics. These guys would do all the things you would expect, strength training, working on technique, all that. But the Olympics were far away and access to the mountain wasn't a thing. But they did know the course, the precise course, what that would be. So part of the training was mental. It was visualization, going moment by moment in their mind through every single thing that would come up from starting point to the end of the course. Though not as strong as when performing or even watching in action, vivid visualization triggers activity in the premotor cortex and mirror neurons, with tweaks to readiness potential and micro-level activity in related muscles, and that's even detectable with electromyography. This kind of training doesn't make you physically stronger, but it sharpens coordination, affects reaction time, and is good for mental edge. The point is, though it only happens in their brain, it's still practice. And I'm a big fan of practice. So that's bonus one. You are practicing. Yeah, okay, not much, but I think your involvement in visualizing the events in a book make it more practice than just passively consuming media. So, are you practicing piloting spaceships? I don't know. One thing I can guarantee is that you're stretching your theory of mind. This is your ability to understand or predict what's going on in other people's heads. And this goes beyond basic empathy to recursive or higher order theory of mind. So what you're doing is you're growing the number of hops you can hold in your head about the knowledge or ignorance in complex networks. Like, he knows that she doesn't know that Robert thinks that she stole the shoes. That kind of practice increases ability, according to studies by Kidd and Castano and others, for people who've ingested a lot of literary fiction. This probably works for watching Game of Thrones too, but my guess is that the stuff we've talked about before makes it stickier and more impactful with books. And don't discount those piloting skills too quickly. Not saying you'll get mastery of skip drives just from reading some space opera, but you do build up your set of what-if scenarios, and at least a few studies showed fiction readers were better at brainstorming solutions to emergencies, better at pivoting in workplace simulations, and just more adaptable. After living 1,000 crises, real surprises are just less alien, and that's pretty cool. Now, I said living with the air quotes there, but here's where I think bonus number 2 comes in. If you've made it this far in the video, then I am certain you're the kind of person who knows what a fractal is. Fractals are funny beasts. Sure, it's trippy to zoom into a Mandelbrot set, and you can get lost exploring these fascinating things. But what I want to underscore here is their dimensionality. How many dimensions something has is just a question of how many coordinates you need to specify a single point on it. It's obvious that a spot on the ball that is Earth needs 3 coordinates, like lat, lon, and altitude for GPS. But I said ball rather than sphere here because a sphere has some fixed radius. So while embedded in 3 space, it's actually a 2-dimensional surface. And to clarify this, which I think sometimes causes confusion, let's take a straight line. Though it's in a 2D plane, it's only 1-dimensional since it's defined as y equals mx plus b. So all I need to give you is x or y, and you've got everything you need to know to select some unique point. This is also true of circles, which may start getting a bit counterintuitive, but since once it's defined, meaning it has a certain specific radius, all I need to give you is the angle, 1 parameter, and you find where I'm talking about. Anyway, fractals are made out of lines or surfaces, but thanks to the infinities lurking within number systems, these things get weird. Like a Sierpinski triangle, where you take a triangle and cut out smaller and smaller triangles ad infinitum. Yeah, that geometry has infinite perimeter, but an area of 0. Okay. Okay, the reason I'm talking about it here is that its calculated dimensionality is somewhere between that of a line and a surface, calculated at something like 1.5 dimensions. Any curve you can draw on a piece of paper, meaning some shape embedded in a 2D space, will always have a dimensionality somewhere between 1 and the maximum supported by that plane, which is 2. Now, I find this notion of Hausdorff or fractal dimensionality pretty fascinating because what it's saying to me is that by increasing the complexity, the space-filling wiggliness of a line, you are in some way increasing its depth, its weight, its presence, Now, that won't ever be enough to escape flatland into 3-space, but it still counts. To get where I was going with this tangent, my notion, and this is nothing more than a gut feeling, is that as you pile on vicarious experience by reading fiction, as you add more and more to the pile of simulated past adventures and unexpected novel situations you've virtually faced and deeply embedded by co-creating them while reading, you're actually adding folds to the wiggliness of your mind and to your life. You only have one life to live, but my theory is that going through hundreds of alternate timelines and side quests and perspectives, you're adding fractional dimensionality and are living at least a bit more than one life. Therefore, my recommendation is yes, perfect your craft, hone your skills, read about the professional things, the scientific things, but also dedicate regular time to fiction that you find interesting. In my case, that's specifically science fiction. I think it allows for as much play with the human side of the equation as other types of stories, but it also gives you a much wider range in terms of context and exploration of ideas. But that's me. I was born at a great time, but often feel like it was just a bit too early. Whatever your preference, choose knowing it will impact who you become and have a bunch of fun while stretching your mind and the depth and breadth of your life as a happy side effect. If you have any sci-fi recommendations, newer books, let me know. I'll see you soon. Until then, onward still.